Okay, so let's dive in. We're looking at the digital world, right? And specifically, India, such a dynamic place, so much content, millions of people there get their news, learn things, connect online. But, well, lately it feels like there's a bit of a storm brewing, especially for creators.
Yeah, particularly those using platforms like YouTube to, inform or challenge things, provide some context. It feels like a serious threat is emerging.
Exactly. So this deep dive, using the fantastic material you shared with us, is all about getting into a really critical issue. It touches on free speech, creativity online.
Mm.
Our mission, if you like, is to sort of unpack how copyright rules, which are meant to protect creators, right, might actually be getting twisted.
Or potentially misused, used in ways that could end up silencing some important voices.
And it's not just direct legal stuff, is it? The material suggests it feels more like a real battle, a battle for who controls the narrative online.
Absolutely. And that has these massive implications for how you get your information every day. There's some surprising players involved, too.
High stakes stuff happening right now. So, okay, picture this. You're a creator. You spend ages researching, making a video, maybe breaking down some complex government policy or looking closely at a big event.
Right, doing the hard work.
And to make your point clear, you include just a short snippet, maybe literally seconds, from a news broadcast about that exact topic. Seems reasonable.
And then, wham, out of nowhere, a copyright strike hits your inbox. And for someone on YouTube, especially if that's their main platform, that strike it's a big deal, more than just a notification.
Oh, definitely. It comes with immediate real penalties. We're talking, what, a mandatory 7-day timeout?
Yeah, 7 days, no uploading, no live streaming. You can't even schedule posts or change simple things like thumbnails or playlists. It's a complete freeze.
It really is like being sidelined, isn't it? Put in a digital penalty box.
Hmm.
And often it feels like it happens without much warning or a clear process up front.
Exactly. You might genuinely believe your use was limited, that it falls under something like fair dealing, just using enough for commentary or criticism.
But the material suggests that news agencies in India are becoming, well, increasingly assertive with these claims, filing them quite aggressively sometimes.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, based on what we've reviewed. There's this significant claim being made, by creators like Dhruv Rathi, Akash Banerjee, the Deshbhakt, very well-known figures.
Huge followings.
Right. And their argument is that these copyright strikes aren't always just about protecting the news agency's intellectual property. They're suggesting these strikes are being used strategically.
Weaponized is the term used.
Weaponized, yeah. Specifically to suppress or maybe silence voices that are critical of the government or that challenge powerful interests.
And like you said, these aren't minor channels. Dhruv Rathi, millions watch him dissecting policies, talking social issues. Akash Banerjee uses satire, sharp analysis. They're major players in India's online information space.
They really shape the conversation for a huge number of people.
Yeah, but then there's the other side, the news agencies.
Of course.
Yeah.
They produce that original footage. It's their content, their investment reporters, cameras, broadcasting costs. It's significant.
So from their perspective, someone using their copyrighted material without permission, well, it looks like theft, pure and simple. Protecting that asset is a legitimate business concern.
Absolutely. Any business would want to protect its work.
Right. But here's the friction point highlighted in the material, the core conflict. It points to claims that some agencies seem to be targeting creators selectively.
Hmm.
And the ones often hit are those known for being critical or independent voices. So the suggestion isn't just that a clip was used, but who used it and what they were saying seems to be the trigger.
Precisely. When you see a pattern, or at least the perception of a pattern, where prominent critical voices face these takedowns more often, while maybe others using similar clips for, say, entertainment don't, it does make you ask questions.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, as the material suggests, if there's something else going on beyond just straightforward copyright enforcement.
A different motive, perhaps.
And then you layer on top, as the material touches on, the fact that media ownership in many places can be closely tied to political power or corporate interests.
Right, that complexity.
Then the idea that copyright claims could be used as a tool, a lever, to manage online narratives or maybe limit dissenting views. It starts to feel less like, a wild theory and more like a possible strategy.
Yes, it definitely adds that layer. It moves beyond a simple legal dispute over who owns what footage.
Yeah.
It points towards the potential for copyright law itself to be well, instrumentalized.
So someone listening might be thinking, okay, sounds tough for them, but how does this really affect me? I just watch stuff.
But it really does impact you, the viewer, directly. I mean, think about where you get your information online. YouTube, other platforms, they become so important for analysis, for education, for perspectives you might not find easily on, say, mainstream TV. Creators aren't just making cat videos. Many are doing journalism. They're educators, analysts. They fill important gaps. If they start feeling they can't use a crucial news clip to provide evidence or context or make a critical point without risking their entire channel.
They might just stop making those videos altogether.
Exactly. They might self-censor or avoid certain topics, and that loss is significant.
Yeah, imagine trying to understand, I don't know, a complex new law. A traditional news report might give you the headline, a quick soundbite.
Right.
But a creator might dedicate 20 minutes, break it all down, show clips of politicians debating it, offer really deep analysis. If they get shut down for using those essential clips, well, you lose access to that depth.
It shrinks the information landscape available to you. The space for diverse perspectives narrows.
And this really hooks into a fundamental idea, right? Freedom of expression.
Absolutely. If creators are effectively muzzled because they can't use relevant, publicly available material to comment on current events, that crucial democratic principle gets eroded online. It's like having the right to speak but being told you can't point to the thing you're talking about.
There's also the legal side we need to touch on.
Yeah.
In places like the U.S., there's this concept of fair use, which is relatively broad, allowing limited use for commentary, criticism, education. India has fair dealing, which allows for similar things. But the material suggests it's often interpreted more narrowly. It can feel less predictable, maybe riskier for creators trying to navigate it.
And the actual process itself, the mechanics of it on platforms like YouTube can be a real challenge. When a news agency files a claim, the platform, maybe to cover itself legally, often seems to lean toward the claimant first.
Right, sort of a strike first, ask questions later feel sometimes.
It can feel that way. The burden then falls really heavily on the creator to fight back, to appeal. And that appeal process, as one analogy in the material put it, can be incredibly difficult, opaque, like navigating a maze blindfolded.
Which leaves creators in this really frustrating position. They need these news clips for credibility, for evidence, but using them feels like a constant gamble.
Yeah, there was even that sarcastic point made in the material suggesting creators might have to start reenacting news events with their friends if they want to comment safely.
Which sounds absurd, but it really highlights the bind they feel they're in.
It really does. It underscores how tough it is to make informative content while navigating platform rules that can seem stacked against you from the start. And that feeds right back into that weaponization idea, that the threat of the strike, the difficulty of the process, becomes a tool of control, even if the claim itself might not hold up legally in the end.
And this whole copyright strike issue, it's not happening in isolation, is it? It's part of a wider picture in India, according to the material. There's broader scrutiny.
That's right. The material mentions other pressures, like the Indian government recently blocking several YouTube news channels. The allegations were about misleading thumbnails, spreading fake anti-India content, sometimes mimicking legitimate news styles.
So different from copyright, but still part of that environment of pressure on online content.
Yes, exactly. And then there was that very concerning case, also mentioned, of Joey Malhotra, a travel vlogger arrested on espionage charges. Now, that's a very different situation, obviously much more serious allegations from the government about content and influence.
But it contributes to this overall picture, doesn't it? A potentially hazardous landscape for prominent online voices.
It really paints a picture of a complex, potentially dangerous minefield. One wrong step, a copyright claim, a government notice, something else entirely could have severe consequences. This pressure forces creators into caution.
Which naturally can stifle spontaneity, critical debate, maybe the willingness to even tackle sensitive subjects in the first place.
So, okay, given all this complexity, what are the potential ways forward that the material suggests?
Well, one idea I mentioned is for creators to try and use more royalty-free or public domain footage.
Right, that's an option. Though finding relevant, specific, timely news clips in those archives can be pretty challenging, right? It might not always fit the bill for commentary on current events.
Yeah, probably not always practical. What else?
The material strongly suggests the platforms, especially YouTube, have a really big role. They could potentially improve their systems, the content ID, the strike process.
How so?
Well, the current automated system often seems to default to the claimant. maybe a more nuanced approach, perhaps involving human review earlier or some kind of mediation before a channel gets hit with penalties. That could make it feel much fairer for creators.
And for a company like Google, with its resources, expecting a more robust, equitable system doesn't seem totally unreasonable, does it?
Not at all. Another avenue explored is maybe more collaboration between news agencies and creators.
Like licensing.
Potentially, yeah. Maybe a simplified licensing system. Creators could pay a small fee for legal use of short clips. That could work for both sides. Revenue for agencies, legal certainty for creators. Though actually implementing that across so many players would be undoubtedly complex.
Sure, getting everyone to agree would be tough.
And finally, the material points towards the law itself. Maybe India's copyright laws need updating, need clearer guidelines for fair dealing, specifically for the digital age we live in now. Applying old laws to new online realities is always tricky.
That makes sense. It's vital to remember the people involved, too, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Being a creator, especially one tackling important stuff, it's incredibly demanding. The research, editing, engaging with comments, dealing with online abuse, and then add the stress of potentially losing your channel over a copyright strike.
It must take a toll.
It impacts their passion, their ability to keep going. And smaller creators, the ones without big teams or legal budgets, they're especially vulnerable. One strike could basically silence them for good.
And even the big names, like Drew Varathy, they face this constant pressure, sometimes even taking down their own videos proactively just to avoid potential trouble. It sounds relentless.
So if we pull back and look at the core tension we've been exploring, it really is this delicate balance, and it seems increasingly challenging. On one hand, the legitimate need to protect intellectual property for those who create the original content.
Right. The news agency's investment.
And on the other, the equally critical need to protect freedom of expression, the ability to comment, critique, educate, using relevant material in this digital public square we all inhabit.
And this isn't just some niche thing for video makers.
Not at all. It fundamentally shapes the information ecosystem that you rely on, that you interact with every single day. It affects who gets heard, what perspectives you encounter, and whether critical voices can actually operate without this constant fear of being shut down.
We've talked about some possible paths forward mentioned in the material creators adapting, platforms evolving, maybe even laws changing.
Yeah, but it's clearly a complex knot. There are no easy answers here.
So bringing it back to you, listening right now, we really encourage you to take what you've heard today and just think about it. When you're watching content online, maybe look at it with a slightly more critical eye. Consider the pressures creators might be under behind the scenes and how that might, subtly or not so subtly, shape the information you end up seeing. And here's a final thought to sort of leave you mulling over. In this digital world that's changing so fast, where the lines between traditional news, independent commentary, viral trends, entertainment, they're all blurring together constantly. What role, what responsibility do the platforms have? What about the creators? And yeah, what responsibility do you, the viewer, have in making sure that information stays open, stays accessible, and stays free from hidden or undue influence?
It's a big question.
It is. Thank you so much for providing the sources that let us take this deep dive today. Keep thinking about these important questions.